is always the DNS. Well, I don't know whether you actually know about this particular phrase, but it is a really popular meme in the Western world among the network engineers. When they talk about it's always a DNS, what they really mean is that when there's a network problem internal to the network, the DHCP side of the DNS, is probably normally the problem of the DNS. Well, although I'm going to talk about DNS, I'm actually not going to talk about the internal DNS. I'm going to talk about something more interesting, something more external, and something even more risky in the new norm. So before I do so, let me start with to discuss something that is quite a popular topic in Hong Kong at the moment. There's a little app that you have to install when you go to any public places in Hong Kong. You know what app I'm talking about? That app actually sparked some kind of controversy recently because it kind of brings out the discussion about whether you should disclose your code or not. And technically, we call this security by design versus security by obscurity. So, normally, in the normal wisdom, we say that definitely security by design is better. That's true, but in the new norm, in the internet age, I may argue, actually, you may have to think about security by obscurity as well, and it may even have its benefits. Now, why am I saying this? Well, let's think about this. What is the most secure by design system that is really popular among the media at the moment in the recent few years? That's blockchain, right? Blockchain is supposed to be extremely secure. It's all encrypted. You can't alter anything like that. Well, it's secure by design. But have blockchain been breached before? Of course, yes. And if you look at this graph, it kind of shows you how many breaches has happened to blockchain technology. And one day in 2017, the guys at Ethereum Classic noticed something really interesting. Somehow at that day, all the users seems to stop trading on the platforms. Well, they check the logs, check the SIEM, and everything seems okay. So what happened? Actually, on that day, on the 30th of June, every single users of Ethereum Classic, when they log into the network, they have the private key stolen by the hacker, and they just see the fund being just transferred to another wallet. And 1 year later, the back wallet team and all the users basically just went crazy on social media. They keep posting on Twitter, on Facebook, on GitHub and stuff like that, warning every single person that they can reach not to log into blackwater.co. Anyone who logged into Blackwater at that day have their funds mysteriously transferred to someone else as well. So this is actually a nightmare for anyone, any company, and any cybersecurity experts, because you spend lots of money securing your system, advertising it, making sure that everyone think and feel safe about this, and you have to go into social media announcing to the public that please don't access my service anymore because it's insecure. So that was what happened to these two companies. And worse still, in 2020, another cryptocurrency company called Liquid.com actually got compromised. And why is it worse? It's because this time the hacker actually take control of the internal email accounts, partially compromise the infrastructure, and gain access to document storage. So everything is exposed by the hacker, to the hacker. And how did they do that? It's always DNS. It's all about the DNS. The hacker actually control the domain names, gain control of the domain names. And if they get control of the domain, everything connects to the domain is accessible by the hacker. That's how it works. So that's why we said it's always DNS. And when it's just to be clear, I'm not talking about the internal side of the DNS. We are talking about the external perspective of DNS. And why does that happen? It's because in the internet age, even if you have a really secure system, the internet itself is insecure by design. So when you connect a secure system to something intrinsically insecure, your system becomes insecure as well. This is the problem that we're facing. Now, let's talk about the new norm. What is the new norm? Now, this is your network. And these are your devices, your endpoint that needs to be connected to the network. And normally, they are in the same network, protected by your firewall. However, in the new norm, everything goes outside your firewall, outside your network. And this is the problem, and you have to multiply this problem by 1,000. So the new norm is a problem because network security needs to go outside the network. And traditionally, when we think about network cybersecurity, we always think about network security, the internal side of it. But there was an article published by the Harvard Business Review recently, and they talk about the need to reframe your cybersecurity. And the central premise of that article actually talks about, exactly what I talk about. When you have a secure system, no matter how much money you pour into your internal, external, your security, your people, your training, it doesn't really matter. As soon as you have your mission-critical system connected to the internet, that you cannot guarantee security anymore, period. So internal security is always about this, network, and we want to prevent someone from intruding into your network. So intrusion detection and stuff like that. That's the predominant thinking about network security. In the inter-network security, though, the central issue is about the connection between networks. So there's a core difference between them. And if you think about network and inter-network, the whole framework is actually different as well. Well, one of the, at one point, there's a security guy that experienced an internet problem, and they asked me, hey, what layer is that problem exists? The answer is no, it's just wrong. When it comes to the internet, it doesn't work on the OSI model. It doesn't, because it works on the TCP IP model, which hates the whole concept of networking or of layering. And well, you may ask, hey, how about this? Would I solve all the problems if I migrate everything to the cloud? Certainly the big guys at Microsoft, the Cloudflare and AWS, they know how to solve the inter-network problem as well. So unfortunately, no, because cloud networking is about migrating your on-premise network into the cloud, and it's secure your network, but it doesn't really solve the problem of inter-networking. Now, so what is inter-network security? There are two things. When we think about inter-network, we have to think about how the internet is actually structured. There are a couple of things that is intrinsic to the structure of the internet. The first one being that you have to think about where to reach your target, right? So that would be your domain name and the IP address behind it. The second is how to actually find that address in the first place. That would be the DNS and the BGP, which determine the routing of the traffic. I'm not going to talk about IP address because it's kind of linked to domain name, and I'm not going to talk about BGP because there's hardly anything you can do about it. But focus on domain and DNS, which you have more control over it. Now, when we think about DNS as a problem, it's always a DNS, but there's it's a line behind that. It basically say that there's no way it was DNS. It was DNS. So it kind of talk about, even if it seems like not DNS, it is DNS. And what does it mean by that? So to illustrate, there's something I missed out in the previous slide, which is encryption. So when we think about traffic between networks, we cannot ignore the transport layer. And to secure transport layer, you have to have the TRS, the SSL certificate. And basically, the TRS is the outer layer that encapsule your data and make it safe. So this is also very important. But why am I leaving it out? Because how SSL works is that it works based on domain name as well, right? So you can't issue an SSL without the domain name. So it's also DNS related. The second thing I actually missed out in the previous slide is that when you think about your network and how it connects to your partners and suppliers and your end users, the other attack type that they can do is that they can pretend to be yourself and in various different ways. So this thing about pretending to be someone else, in practice, we normally call that phishing attacks. And one of the, CISO in Hong Kong that I talked to, when I talk about what's the most important cybersecurity threat he faced, he just point out the finger and say that, this finger is the most important cybersecurity issue, is the finger. So phishing, basically works on the human nature of clicking things unintentionally, and that is also a problem. So phishing is also a DNS problem as well. So why am I saying this? Because ICANN say so. ICANN is basically like the internet organizer of the internet. They regulate internet. So and according to ICANN, there's a concept about DNS abuse. And when it comes to DNS abuse, what they're talking about is basically this that I listed out over there: spam, phishing, malware, botnet, farming. So phishing, according to ICANN, is also a DNS issue. And hey, hold on a minute. I can understand phishing, but what about malware? How malware become a DNS issue as well? Well, I'm not saying malware is 100% DNS issue, but a lot of the cases, malware can be distributed via DNS, especially it's delivered via the internet. Now, this is a case which is very interesting. It's a payment service provider called CheckFree. So at one point, their registrar actually got hijacked, and all customers of CheckFree were redirected to a website server that automatically download malware. So every single customer of that company have their computer injected with malware. Now, how DNS hijacking can lead to ransomware as well. Glen Crab is one of the most popular ransomware in 2018-19. It had a really higher ransom rate, and actually, research has found that DNS hijacking was frequently used to launch the attack. And how it actually distributed was actually through a variety of rules, like including fake DHL shipping notice, phony AT&T, e-fax alert and stuff like that. So it can be anything. But what's the commonality behind this is that when the researcher looked into the attack in a deeper level, all the phishing domain name being used was altered at the DNS level. Now, let's go back to phishing as well. So, a lot of different large companies like Expedia, Mozilla, Yap, Facebook, MasterCard, and McDonald's, all of them actually got compromised in some way. Not the main site, but their defensive registration. The hacker, a group of hacker maybe, basically launched a particular phishing attack called snowshoe spamming. And what this does is that it hijacks the defensive names of the corporations and use these domain names to launch phishing attacks against their customers. Why are they doing so? Because a lot of the time, when you look into your firewalls and spam traps and stuff like that, they will also these technology will also look into the registration data of the domain names. And if they find some domain name that's just been recently registered for one day, for example, and then been used to massively send out thousands and thousands of email, that sounds really fishy, and they will block it. So one way to bypass this is that the spammer start to hijack legitimate domain names and use those to get a higher score to bypass the spam filters. And that's how they can do that. So, once again, phishing is linked over there. One of the most dangerous trends that we have seen related to phishing is actually this. When you think about how email actually works, the email, when you send out a legitimate email, it went through your recursive DNS to your authoritative DNS. If someone actually compromised either of the domain name or the DNS server, they can get access, they can redirect everything into a fake MTA, right? A fake mail server. And then they can actually establish something called CEO or CFO at example.com, and then send that email using your legitimate domain name to your finance department, for example, asking them to send a payment. When they do it like that, this is not the typical phishing attack that you can see. There's no way for any of those spam traps to detect this because they're using your legitimate domain names. So this is a really dangerous trend that we can see. And we can see that from the liquid.com example that I showed you before. It is highly probable because they gain control of the internal email server. Now, another example that I want to point out is a domain name called Perl.com. So Perl.com is a computing language, a programming language. And Perl.com is used to post different articles and news about that particular language. In Jan 27th, they discovered that their registrar account was compromised a few months back in September 2020. And the domain name was actually transferred twice, first to a Chinese registrar and then to Key System. Now, that probably say that the hacker probably a Chinese base. And what's happened is that, why is it detected so late? It's because they didn't change the names of a record. And the domain name actually transferred to a parking page. But when you look into it, when they change the IP address, ultimately, you discover that this IP address is ultimately linked to a C2 server. So the question you may ask is that what can expose if your main domain.com is pointed to a C2 server? How much of a compromise, how much of a damage can it done? Well, lastly, talk about DNS. Let's talk about a little bit about SSL as well. This is just hot to press. 2 weeks ago, Google Voice actually has outage because of expired TLS certificate. And whether you talk about domain name and TLS, a lot of the time this is not about hacking. It's all about mismanagement. And this is a really good example to showcase that. Now, let me skip this. But what this talk about is that there are many, many cases that you can think about and is related to domain name hijacking and DNS hijacking. It poses a lot of risk to organization. And the trend is really dangerous because it's becoming from a website defacement to something that they can steal information without actually taking down your site as well. So it's remain hidden throughout. So let's talk about cybersecurity on the internet level. So what exactly should you do? Now, the first thing you have to remember is that your domain name is not a passive registration. It's an active registration, and your registrar is an active third-party provider providing the connection of your name server record. So when they got compromised and changed that, your DNS went down, and so does your website, your email, your cloud service, and your all sort of authentication also went down. And just to highlight this, your cloud is connected via DNS as well. So that's how cloud doesn't really resolve the problem. Now, the first commandment I want to say is that the first thing you have to remember is that you have to treat your domain name as critical asset, implement registry log, and conduct third-party risk assessments on your domain name registrar. And this is something that is not recommended by me, but by a lot of companies as well, like the Department of Homeland Security of the US, the NCSC in UK, JPRS, HALC, ICANN, FireEye, all sort of security experts have warned about this risk. Second commandment is that we should avoid free and cheap DNS and implement DNSSEC. Now, this is interesting because I did some research about how much does it cost to do cloud migration and construct your internal network. Some say 1.2 million, one say more. Doesn't matter. The matter of fact is that when it comes to domain name and DNS, most of the time in Hong Kong, people are spending like $14.99 on the domain and $0 on the DNS, because the hosting server basically says, hey, I'll give it to you for free. So look, the domain name and DNS is foundational. It linked to every single one of these applications. And if you're spending millions of dollars, how much are you using to protect all this investment? $14.99 doesn't seem to be reasonable, right? And what is considered a great enterprise DNS setup? There are a lot of different criteria that we can talk about. I'm not going to go through this at the moment, but you can read about this. But what I want to point out is actually the third point about don't mix it. Now, a lot of the time when we think about DNS setup, we tend to merge everything into one service provider. The DNS, the CDN, and the cloud all merge together. That works, and it's easy. So I'm not against that idea in principle. But when you think about this, DNS is foundational in a way that every single application, the CDN and cloud are all connected via DNS, right? Everything is connected to the DNS. But depending on the setup, sometimes you may not want to put everything into the same CDN, or you may want to, a lot of people talk about multi-cloud strategy and stuff like that. So this is something that we have to think about. Should we be, consolidate everything in a single one? Or if not, if we want more flexibility, maybe we have to, decentralize and make sure that DNS become independent. But whatever we do, doesn't matter. You have to remember that we have to make sure that we're using an enterprise-grade DNS. Now, the third commandment is automate SSL renewal. Now, everyone would know that the SSL certificate is now maximum at 1 year, 398 days. And there's something been done already. But behind the scene at the CA/B forum or CAP forum, what happened is that Apple actually sit down and say that, hey, I have enough talks. I will implement on Safari 1 year limitation SSL. Anything outside of a year, I will not recognize. And the Google and the Firefox, they say, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. And the CA is just sitting there and say, all right, okay, if you say so, all right, we'll comply. So the problem is, when you look into Let's Encrypt, which is a company formed by all these giants as well, they have a policy of 90 days lifetime certificate. And the reason they gave is that because they want to encourage automation. Now, the fourth commandment is that you have to spoof-proof not only yourself, but also your customer by implementing something like DNSSEC, DNS abuse, anti-phishing service for your customer as well. So this is also not something from me. This is from Vint, the father of the internet. When there's an article he published in Quartz, I think 2 years ago, when he talked about internet security, what he mentioned is that it is more about verifying and securing the identity of people and organizations. That's core of internet security. So the solution he proposed is that you have to spoof-proof the web, which includes also your customer, not only your internal network. So in conclusion, I know DNS is not sexy. So no director in the right mind would make a movie about DNS. They would, about malware and how hijacking can take down a nuclear facility or something like that. DNS is not sexy, I know, and it is not. I'm not saying that the CIO needs to come in and manage domain names, but if there's something that is able to take down your entire infrastructure, shouldn't the CIO at least know how to organize this, making the rules? So, and that's the conclusion I want to make. DNS management has never been a zero-day attack. And if something happens on DNS, it takes down all your infrastructure, your CEO is going to talk to your CIO, and your CIO is going to talk to you about why. Why does that happen? It's mismanagement. So there's no excuse, because DNS is so foundational in the internet age. And when we think about cybersecurity in this world, in the new norm, we have to think about both network security and inter-network security. And when it comes to inter-network security, it's always the DNS. Thank you.